Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're discussing the new 3.10 firmware package for the Nikon Z9. And what we want to know today is how improved is the autofocus, especially on birds in flight? Well, let's talk about it. All right, a little backstory from a couple weeks ago, just kind of level set this. I was in Homer and I ran across a short-eared owl flying around the spit in some fields with some grass, the stalks poking up from the grass and everything. It was a pretty cool scene. And as long as the owl was isolated against the sky or the snow and fairly large in the field of view on the Nikon Z9, it grabbed it fairly well. But once it got a little farther distance, say about maybe a quarter of the frame in the field of view, or against maybe some light backgrounds in the snow, Z9 wouldn't pick up that owl anytime it'd go flying. Like I said, if it was flying behind me, if it was in the snow or higher up in the sky, pick it up great. If it hit this grass or things like that, would lose it completely. So it just would not lock it up. No matter what autofocus method I chose, auto area AF, no way. Even wide area, the large and the small, or the middle, even if I got the owl inside the box, it wouldn't really lock onto it maybe for a second. And the owl was just a blur. Needless to say, I was pretty frustrated with that. Most of the scenarios besides that weekend, the autofocus worked really well when I was getting on, maybe the bird was perched or I had some otters and stuff, the autofocus worked great. But for those scenarios, it failed big time. And so as a result, instead of using the Z9 that has that beautiful sensor, I grabbed the R7 and sure enough, it locked it up. Anywhere it went, that R7 locked that eye. But the image on the R7, even though it's really good versus the Z9, it's night and day. I really wanted that owl because the short-eared owls to me are such a treasured subject that I really want to capture the Z9. Plus, I spent a lot of money on this camera and I expected better autofocus performance in that type of scenario for this. So needless to say, I was a bit bummed on that day. Now let's fast forward to last week and where we're at today. Nikon released its latest firmware patch 3.10 and it stated that it had greatly improved the contrast in the autofocus subjects in the wide area, 3D, and auto area AF modes. And a few folks I know had been using the patch seemed fairly happy with it. Now it's a little bit of a spoiler here for a video series I'm working on from last week. I went out several days chasing some short-eared owls. When I went out doing another video that I have also coming about some otters, I ran into this short-eared owl. And my biggest fear on this was the autofocus of the Z9, as I really wanted to capture those owls with that camera, just the amazing image quality that the Z9 has. Now the R7 I knew would lock on the owls at fine. Even though the IQ on that camera is great, it's not as good as the Z9, nor should it be. A lower level crop sensor versus a flagship, there shouldn't be any competition. There's not with those two cameras as far as the IQ, or at least the colors that come out of that camera. And when I saw the first owl, now I have the 3.1 software on the camera. When I saw the first owl, the Z9, it didn't lock up, but that was due to my error more because I had the camera set to auto area AF because I was doing something prior to that. And since it was right there, it was flying, I didn't have time to mess with the camera. So I dropped the Z9, picked up the R7 to use it to finish up that little short encounter, and sure enough, the R7 did its thing, locked it up, it did fine. Good. But, like I said, I'm still wanting to use the Z9. So when I ran into the next owl, the next short-eared owl I found, I forced myself to use the Z9 only this time, walked out in the field, left the R7 in the truck, couldn't touch it. And again, I had the camera this time set up for success. Remember I talked in another video about using the R7 here, which I'm filming myself right now, is if I've got everything set up before I start shooting, then I'm set up for success. And I did that with the Z9 this time. I set the camera in wide area L, wide area AF, which means I've got a box, a smaller box. And the camera, when I hit that sucker, got him in flight across brown background, had him in that box, it locked up. Needless to say, extremely happy. And prior to this 3.10 patch, I couldn't get that to lock up that way against, that short-eared owl against those brown backgrounds or busy backgrounds in flight. Other birds, like eagles, things like that, I could lock up pretty well. So yes, for starters, the AF is improved, especially on birds in flight. Well, how much better is it? Well, let's look at some EVF footage I shot when I was in Seward this weekend. And a nice snowstorm came rolling in, and it rolled through Seward with some 35-mile-an-hour plus winds. And mainly I just had some seagulls in the EVS footage, but it's fairly low contrast situation with no sun, falling snow, light gray clouds, and a light gray bird or a white bird. And I also was overexposing here on top of that to give a little less contrast situation. And they were quite a good distance out for me. So I was using the 500 f4 with the 1.4 extender, so I was at 700. So I'm adding even more atmospheric distortion to that also. And these birds are small in frame. And as we can see here with the wide L, using that little box, as long as I got the bird in the box, it locks up really fast. And a couple of times I had a little bit of delay getting the yellow box on the bird, but very, very small. But pretty much when I got the box on the bird, it was locking up pretty good. Now again, yes, I have the bird in the sky, but it is a white bird on a very gray white sky, so very low contrast situation. But overall, any wide type box I added worked really, really good. I even went and added the auto area AF up, and it locked up the bird really well. Sometimes it gave me a few of the red boxes pixelating all over the bird, but at least it was hitting the bird. But very soon it would lock up the gold box, and the gold box would hang onto it and stay onto it. But for me, the wide area L, large, works the best and gets the fastest lock on these birds. And as you can see here, even once it's locked up, once that bird's locked on that gold, when I pass the other birds or I'm going down towards the water, the lock is staying fairly well on that bird. So yeah, it's pretty improved. And the day prior to all these seagulls, I had another fun encounter, and I didn't get EVF footage, but I did get video, and I got stills of the fun encounter that I had. Out here in the bay outside of Seward, there's a cannery here, and it'll dump some of the stuff they flayed or discarded the fish into the bay there. At the same time, the herring come up and feed, and what that causes the gulls come up and feed, and what happened here is, I had a bunch of eagles start coming in and feeding, and it was just incredible to watch. I had like 1 or 2 eagles come in, and they were tussling over the food, and then a bunch of eagles. I had about 20, 30 eagles in here diving and hitting the water and getting this. Now, again, these birds were way out there. They're extremely small in frame. And what I noticed is when I had that box on them, the wide L, snapping on them, staying with them the whole time. Now, when I snap the picture and I look on the camera, the problem is the bird's so far away. Everything's pretty detailed, but like I said, they're extremely small in frame. I mean, they're about 1/10 of the frame inside there, which you're not going to get a whole lot of detail on any camera right now. But it still captured them, it locked onto them, it stayed on them the whole time. Really impressed me. In video, the video is a lot stickier. They didn't talk about the autofocus being better in video, or maybe they did, I don't remember it, but that sucker was locking on the whole time onto that bird and staying with that bird through everything. So it made shooting video so good. And I was handheld the whole time with this, so the footage looked a little shaky, that's why. So these eagles, they'd go down there, they'd feed on those fish, and they'd come over to the beach, and they'd land on this rocky beach and take a break, then they'd go back out and feed some more. And a couple times they'd tussle on the beach, and I got this wild set of shots here. It was really fun to watch. And the entire time, that video and the stills locked those guys up, and I was extremely, extremely happy with that situation. So what's my final conclusion after heavily testing this firmware version 3.10 for the Nikon Z9? Well, as I just said a few minutes ago, I think they finally got over the hump where in most situations with the right autofocus mode, remember that part, okay? You can lock up your subject fairly well. Now this next part I'm probably going to piss some people off. Now, did it catch up to Canon? Well, no, it did not catch up to Canon. Canon's autofocus just works extremely well with the R7, the R6 Mark II, those cameras, the R3. Anything you're seeing within the viewfinder, and you don't have to change modes and do all that. One autofocus setup, you're golden once you get it set up. But Nikon Z9 is extremely closer now. To me, it's a large jump in the autofocus functionality. It makes me feel a lot better about Nikon's future in the autofocus space, extremely. What I noticed with this firmware was that the autofocus on still subjects, things that I normally could hit okay, it was much snappier. So I went out and looked at some otters and foxes, things like that, and it was much quicker to grab it when I was using 3D or the auto area AF, especially birds in flight. It was locked up a lot better with that. Not these low contrast subjects, that is. That still requires a box. And so really things that were very hard, we're just not able to hit it all prior to this patch. Well, it seems now that it's hitting those things quite well. Now, subjects behind an object or a bird in a busy tree or a bush, yeah, those are still an issue for any autofocus system, Canon, Nikon, Sony. They're all going to have problems with that. You still have to really work on those things. And at the end of this, what's my suggestion what AF area mode to use, or how I found to use it? Well, for me, most static subjects, a fairly clean background, it's going to be 3D auto tracking. Just get that point on that subject and it'll find the eye. Busier backgrounds, yeah, single point, get to it, then try to 3D again. Birds in flight, if they've got a clean background or a high contrast area, well, use the auto area AF. Use that one, works great. If it's in low contrast modes, there's more colors behind the bird, it gets a little busier, use the wide area L or the wide area middle, one of those two, whichever one works better for you, but those work great. So again, what's the biggest takeaway for me? Well, for the first time ever with the Nikon Z9, I'm confident I can acquire autofocus on almost any situation now. Now, I still have to direct that autofocus mode, and I have to work quite a bit to be able to keep that box on the bird or do some other things, but I know it's going to acquire it. So now I can actually, just like my Canon cameras, I can play more with the light instead of fighting the autofocus system. And again, it's not the Canon AF level, but it's getting closer with each firmware update, really close. So I'm really happy with that. So that's going to make the decision even harder the longer Canon goes with this R1, if the Nikon Z9 keeps going up, the bird in the hand kind of thing. But I'm still going for that R1, don't worry. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, watch the video through, all those fun things. Until next time, guys, get out and go run that shutter.